Madam Chair, members, good afternoon. The issue of publicly funded stadiums is not new. In fact, the history of subsidized professional sports is built on a foundation of failure. In 1923, the Los Angeles Coliseum was funded by taxpayers at the cost of just under $1 million in a failed bid to host the Olympic Games. Almost 400 miles to the north, in Alameda, California, is another famous Coliseum, the home of the Oakland Raiders. Except it's not the Oakland Raiders anymore, or at least it will not be come 2019. The Las Vegas Raiders are off to greener pastures, leaving Alameda and Oakland County taxpayers with a bill dating back to 1995 that will cost them $350 million by the time it is paid off. Half a decade after the home team they brought back has gone. The result is a $13 million annual payment between the two counties that will run until 2025. That is not counting Oracle Stadium, whose $7 million annual bill is currently paid by the Warriors. But they too are leaving the city and their old stadium's debt behind them. Who will front the bill when they have gone? That question will likely be answered by the city's Coliseum Authority, but even then, only one thing is definite. It will be the taxpayers who pay off their city's debt. These are issues, seemingly in this case, limited to the local level. However, thanks to tax breaks, $3.2 billion have been spent in federal funds for stadiums like these since the year 2000. Senators Booker and Lankford have introduced a bill to stop government subsidies being given to support privately owned professional sports teams. Because it's time hardworking Americans stop footing billions of dollars just for the chance to root for a guy with their hometown written on his back. I would like to tell you about two people, both of whom are interested parties in this matter. The first is Hal Steinbrenner. If you've not heard of him, I don't blame you. But you have probably heard of at least some of his former employees. They include Derek Jeter and Alex Rodriguez. Hal Steinbrenner and his family own the New York Yankees, and together they are worth $3.2 billion, the same amount that the federal government has paid to support professional stadiums just in the last 2 decades. Now, I'm sure Hal and his family are great people, but the second person I'm going to tell you about should not have to pay to support the Steinbrenners and their family business. Jake Painter is a lifelong fan of the San Francisco 49ers. For any of you who still watch football, feel free to take a moment of silence. The son of a Bay Area firefighter, Jake grew up going to Candlestick Park, the 49ers' home field back then, to cheer on his once great football team. That stadium is gone now, along with any chance of a Super Bowl ring. Instead, shiny new Levi Stadium, which the city took out an $850 million loan for. Like Candlestick, it's about a 3-hour drive from Loomis, California, where Jake Painter works and lives. But as of 2014, the 49ers have the highest ticket price in the NFL, with an average of $117 per ticket. That number represented a 40% price increase in just 1 year. Now, there's a lot of factors in that, and I will not pretend that bump was a sole reflection of stadium costs. But when Jake Painter pays the $117 for the game and drives 6 hours round trip for the sake of cheering on his home team, he deserves to know that not a dime of his money went to Hal Steinbrenner, 3,000 miles away in New York City. To properly stop the funding of stadiums, one must understand the system through which subsidies are given. Stadium funding hinges on Internal Revenue Code subsection 141, which defines private activity bonds. Private activity bonds are tax exempt, and thus motivate investment. Under this qualification, cities must acquire 90% of the debt on the cost of the stadium, with revenue from the stadium capped at paying for a maximum of 10% of its costs. The result is a major gamble, one that has failed a countless number of times. In hopes of boosting the local economy, The public acquires the debt and bets on making up for the funding deficit with the resulting boom that follows. Dennis Zimmerman, a former Congressional Budget Office and Congressional Research Service analyst, who will provide expert testimony to this committee, states that the 10% measure was enacted in the Tax Reform Act of 1986 as a barrier to publicly funded stadiums. The idea was that no city councilors or authority would accrue that sort of funding, with a cap placed on how much debt could be paid off with stadium revenue. Instead, taxpayers are being taken advantage of now more than ever. Federal subsidies run across all sports, at least the big ones. In the top 10 stadiums to receive subsidies, basketball, football, and baseball are all represented. This is not an isolated issue. The economic boosts these stadiums provide their host cities in the short term serves as the motivator for the amount of debt the city accepts. The prospect of jobs and construction of the stadium itself, as well as its supporting infrastructure, give hopes of increased employment rates and competitive wages. However, these prove to be short-term. The infrastructure is, of course, publicly funded, and its construction, as well as that of the stadium, typically only employs workers for 2 to 3 years. The concession stand jobs, parking attendants, etc., not only work only a couple days a week, most stadiums are, of course, only seasonal. The short-term benefits for construction projects are overshadowed by long-term debt, and the low-paying, unskilled jobs that make up the majority of stadium employment have a high turnover rate. $431 million. That is the amount of money Hal Steinbrenner and his New York Yankees have received in federal funding since 2000. From everyday, hard-working Americans, whether they are fans of sports or not, even those who are morally object to the violence inherent with some of these professions are compelled to participate in their continued funding. Out of respect for their own moral values, the government has a duty to protect their freedom of conscience. Jake Painter lacks this kind of conscience, but he does pay his taxes. And I would like to be able to tell him he is not responsible for the city of New York's baseball stadium.